How do you change an organisation? And particularly, how do you change an organisation for the better? Because you could change an organisation and make things worse. And one of the main definitions of innovation is that when you change an organisation for the better, when value emerges, when there is a return on the investment, when things are better than they were before, you could measure that in different ways, but when something is better than it was before, then that is seen as an innovation, a step forward, a step of improvement. And that's the same in life too. How do you change yourself for the better? Well, new ideas, new thinking, changing what you do and putting in something novel or different, being creative, experimenting and finding out that the result of that experimentation is something new, different, but better. And that's often called innovation. And in the organizational world, whether that's public or private sector, where there are products and services being delivered, well, of course, you can innovate service, and that's sometimes called service innovation. If you were giving service in the health service, improved healthcare, improved ways that you deliver the patient experience, those new processes, if they make things better in measurable ways, then that's often called an innovation in that service. You can innovate a product. A new product can come out, and you'll see that in the world, for example, of mobile phones and a lot of digital hardware. When new products come out that are deemed to be better, faster processors, better design, better environmental standards, these are product innovations, where the product itself, particularly in terms of its design, the way it's made, is improved in some way. And similarly, you can also improve the process of how something is delivered. And I remember doing some research over in a country called Slovenia, which I'm sure you've heard of, with some engineers there. And in the early days, if you wanted to cut metal, say in a manufacturing process, that was done with a mechanical cutter. But then there was a process innovation called laser cutting, where the metal was cut with lasers. And more recently, you may well have heard of something called water jet cutting, where very, very fast and powerful jets of water can even cut metal. And the cut can be cleaner, and there can be less waste, and water jet and ice jet cutting has been looked at, how that might be used in making surgery more effective, more accurate, and with less infection. And so changes in processes also can go alongside product innovation. The processes as part of a mobile phone, the faster processor, the more efficient processor, clearer pictures, say in a camera. The processes inside are innovated, and then the product itself is innovated in the process. So these things aren't separate in the way that we use those terms. They quite often overlap with each other. But essentially, if the focus is on a product that is sold and it's the change to that product that you notice is part of your intention, then you may label that product innovation. A product design may not change, but how it works inside, which you don't see, the program, the software, may become more efficient or more effective or different, and that's really process innovation. And then, of course, something is delivered, a product is delivered, and that's quicker, more effective, more accurate, less damage to the product because of the way it's delivered. We're seeing the first steps in automated delivery, be that through drones, be that through self-driving lorries. Is that going to be a process, service, and product innovation? We will soon see. So we have product innovation, we have process innovation, we have service innovation, and an organisation or a business could innovate using some or all of those elements of innovation. Then, of course, you can look at the scope of that innovation. The innovation can be small, very small steps, and that's sometimes called incremental innovation. And if in terms of digital innovation, if on your mobile phone you notice that your Android 7.0 has an upgrade to make it more secure, or that the camera works slightly better to move to Android 7.1, then that would be an incremental innovation. But when we move to Android 8, I think it's going to be called Oreo, and there are radical changes to that innovation. It's something very, very different. Sometimes a big step forward. Then, of course, what we've got is incremental, meaning small step change, and then we've got radical innovation, meaning big step change. And of course, big step change, radical innovation, could be delivered over time through lots of small steps. Literally, think about going up the steps to get to the top. You travel a long way, but in small steps. So a product, a process, or a service could be incrementally innovated. It could be radically innovated overnight with a massive change in design. Or you could take incremental steps to achieve a radical innovation over the long term. So there's all different kinds of innovation, lots of words around that. Now, that innovation changes what is already there, sometimes for the better in small ways and sometimes for the better in big ways. A company can take a huge step from being a small business to being one of the biggest players in the market. And lots of startups, including Facebook, for example, Twitter, were very small organizations to start with, as was Airbnb. And even as was, things like a Ford Motor Company that got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so over time, an organization can use innovation to grow and to develop and change. Now, that change can be something that's very well planned, that's seen very clearly ahead, and that isn't experienced by the organization itself as too difficult, as too uncomfortable. But most organizations will have stories to tell of how things got really bad and they didn't see it coming. And actually, some organizations, of course, died as a result of that, went under. But others will point to the fact that it was the crisis that triggered the innovation. And sometimes the innovation itself can trigger a crisis. And that can be in an organization where, for example, in the manufacturing industries of the 1980s particularly, along came two things. One was called total quality management, another was called just in time. Just in time is demand based, where you don't hold lots of stock, but you create such a quick responsive system that you just make what's needed, reducing waste and increasing responsiveness. And that was actually the essence of what a lot of Japanese companies were doing, say in the automobile industry. And other countries, their car industries were almost devastated by not seeing that innovation coming. And when it came along, there was a lot of reaction to it and people not wanting to change. But they were kind of forced to react at the end. They were disrupted. And a lot of innovation is disruptive. It changes the game, and that's not always comfortable. So a crisis is induced. There's a lot of resistance to change. Disruptive innovation in your life can happen when you go to the doctor and suddenly you get news that you weren't hoping, and the doctor says you've got to take a radical change in your diet. You've got to get some exercise, otherwise you're not going to live very long. That can be bad news, that can be shocking news, and those changes, those improvements, are not just innovation, which could be lots of incremental steps or an overnight change, but it can also be disruptive. And that's one of the kind of buzzwords around innovation at the moment. Disruptive innovation is innovation that really changes the game and is not always easy. And it disrupts the status quo, the way we do things around here. And some organizations are better at that reaction than others. So imagine you see a company or an organization that it may not be unsuccessful, it might be doing okay, but it's realized that it's not performing as well as it should, and it's looking ahead with projections, and it may not be around in the future, or it wants to grow and develop faster. It has an ambition. And what you may need to do is start to do some research, which of course is about creating an evidence base. You may look at what the competitors are doing, what other players in the field are doing. You might want to identify what is called best practice. And that is where you may come up with conclusions that radical innovation might be needed, product, process, or service. And it won't be one or the other. You might identify in some areas of the business incremental innovations, others radical. And particularly at the strategic level, if the whole strategy of the organization needs to change, you may be the person bringing disruption to that organization. And part of that success is how does it manage that disruption? And a lot of success now is around that disruption. So if you see an organization and you're working in there as a leader in some form, or you're an innovator, maybe even in your own business, what is it that needs to change? And mostly, what is it that needs to change for the better?